It's Thanksgiving weekend, 1998, just outside Muskegon, Michigan. Most houses on Russell Road are dark and quiet. The holiday is winding down. Leftovers are stacked in fridges. Football games are over, and families are easing back into normal life. At the Pravacki home, though, nothing is normal. It's late on Sunday night, November 29th. April Boss's parents are worried. Their 19-year-old daughter was supposed to be home hours ago. She went to her boyfriend's house for a belated Thanksgiving dinner with his family and never came back. No call, no note, no answer on the house phone. So her parents get in the car and drive. They turn onto the long, tree-lined drive that leads up to the Pravacki property. A big, comfortable house on a few acres of land in Dalton Township in the Reith's Puffer School District. Inside, the lights are on, but the place feels wrong. No one comes to the door. No movement behind the curtains. They knock. Nothing. They call inside, April's mom's voice echoing down the hall. Still nothing. It's the kind of silence that raises the hair on your arms. Eventually, they push the door open and step in. The scene that greets them doesn't look like any version of Thanksgiving. It looks like something out of a nightmare. Items out of place, signs of a struggle, and then, as they move further into the house, bodies. They stumble back out into the cold Michigan air and dial 911 with shaking hands. Within minutes, Muskegon County Sheriff's deputies are tearing up the drive, lights cutting the dark. They don't rush straight in. No one knows where the killer is or if he's still inside. The house is locked down as a possible active scene. Neighbors gather at the end of the drive, trading half-sentences and terrified guesses. What officers eventually find inside the Pravacki home will haunt them for the rest of their careers. 5 people dead, 2 generations of one family wiped out. And at first, no clear sign of why. To understand what happened in that house, you have to know who lived there. Stephen and Linda Pravacki were in their late 40s. The kind of solid, middle-class couple you'd expect to find on a quiet rural road in West Michigan. Stephen worked in local business. Linda had a reputation as a caring, involved mom. They'd raised 2 sons, Jedediah, 19, and Seth, 18. Jed was the golden boy, athletic, outgoing, close to his girlfriend, April. He'd recently graduated Reith's Puffer High School and was figuring out his next steps. April's younger brother would later say his sister adored Jed. She was over at the house all the time, part of the furniture on Russell Road. Seth, the younger son, was different, quiet, smart. A B-average student at Reith's Puffer High, where he was a senior that fall. Classmates described him as soft-spoken, maybe a little distant, but not someone who drew trouble. Teachers saw a kid who could do the work. On paper, his life looked like a solid track toward graduation and whatever came after. Behind that surface, there were fractures. A year before the murders, in 1997, Seth had been caught stealing beer from the store where he worked and selling it to other teens. He'd also been picked up for shoplifting at another shop. A juvenile court sent him to counseling and put him on probation. A judge ordered him to take an antidepressant, Wellbutrin. He did his 10 days in a youth home, completed probation, went back to school. Officially, the system checked the box. Problem addressed, case closed. At home, though, his parents were worried. According to friends and relatives, Stephen confided that he thought his younger son might be a psychopath, someone who didn't seem to feel guilt the way other people did. Linda told people Seth was out of control. He'd started drinking and using marijuana in his early teens. By his own later claims, he was experimenting with LSD and amphetamines by 16. He was angry, and a lot of that anger was pointed at the people who lived under the same roof. There were specific flashpoints. An aunt later said that when Seth brought home a C on his report card, his parents took away his car, a consequence that enraged him. The year of the murders, he'd also been butting heads with his father constantly. Seth would later tell police, and years afterward, a newspaper, that his father had threatened to kick him out of the house, that his parents didn't love him, that he felt the whole family was ganging up on him. Whether that was reality or just the story he told himself, it was the story he used. Because as Thanksgiving 1998 approached, Seth Pravacki stopped imagining revenge in his head and started planning it in the real world. The murders happened on the Sunday of Thanksgiving weekend, November 29th, not the Thursday holiday itself. The family had planned a delayed Thanksgiving meal that day. People had work schedules, church, obligations. Sunday lunch was their chance to sit down together, eat, and maybe smooth over some of the tension that had been swirling around the house. Instead, it became the window Seth used. At some point that morning, he went into his parents' bedroom closet and took his father's .22 caliber Ruger handgun. He'd tried to buy his own .22 ammunition at a local store the night before, but security footage would later show the clerk refusing the sale because he was underage. Where he got the cartridges he used that day is still unclear. What we do know is that around midday, the Pravacki house on Russell Road looked like any other home, prepping for a family meal. Stephen left around 12:45 p.m. to pick up his father, 78-year-old Jonathan Pravacki, so the older man wouldn't have to drive. Linda was upstairs getting ready. Jed was in the living room, watching TV. April was expected later. According to Seth's own confession, this is how he said it went. He walked downstairs with the pistol hidden behind his back. He stepped into the room where his older brother was sitting, eyes on the television, and he raised the gun. What happened in those next seconds would remain hidden until Seth finally told investigators the sequence of events. In the immediate aftermath, all anyone in town knew was the result. Jed was dragged to the basement. Their grandfather never made it past the garage. Linda never came out of the shower. April walked into a house that had already turned into a crime scene. By the end of that afternoon, 5 people were dead, each shot in the head at close range, execution style. As the prosecutor would later put it, John, the grandfather, had been shot twice, as if Seth wanted to make absolutely certain he was dead. And yet, as darkness fell over Muskegon County, there were no sirens, no swarm of police cars, no news vans. The house sat on its quiet road, full of bodies and blood and silence. The only person who knew what was inside was still there, and already thinking about how to make it all disappear. Back on Russell Road, as patrol cars stacked up at the end of the drive late that night, deputies had no idea yet that the killer was an 18-year-old high school student, or that he'd already spent hours cleaning and staging the scene. They just knew what they could see from outside. A nice house, multiple vehicles, worried parents, no signs of forced entry. Inside, 5 Thanksgiving plates would never be used. Neighbors were stunned as word began to leak out in the early hours of Monday. 1 family, 5 victims. Reith's Puffer schools went into lockdown the next morning as a precaution. Nobody knew where the suspect was or whether he might target the high school. Teachers tried to explain to students why there were police dogs on campus and helicopters thudding overhead. Counselors began preparing for grief sessions without even knowing which students had lost whom. News bulletins called it a family massacre. Some reporters reached back a few days in their minds and shuddered. While most of America watched parades and football, an 18-year-old in Muskegon had apparently been planning to erase his entire family before Monday's classes. The question that hung in the air, cold and heavy, was simple and impossible at the same time. Why? Even now, more than 25 years later, people who worked the case will tell you that they never really got an answer that made sense. There were theories: mental health, drugs, resentment, personality disorders. There were letters Seth wrote from prison years later, blaming everything from LSD to being raised without religion. There were court records and psychological evaluations and witness statements. None of them brought those 5 people back. For now, in late November 1998, detectives had more immediate problems. 5 bodies in a house, a crime scene that someone had already tried to clean, a community in shock, and one key fact they were about to discover. The family's youngest son was missing. In part 2, we'll go hour by hour through that Sunday afternoon. How Seth says he carried out the killings, the friend he called to help cover it up, the bizarre hours they spent mopping up blood and returning blockbuster movies, and the manhunt that ended in a barn a mile from the Privacki home. Sunday, November 29th, 1998. Late morning in Dalton Township. Upstairs, Linda Privacki is getting ready for a delayed Thanksgiving dinner. Downstairs, 19-year-old Jed is on the couch in the living room, watching TV. Stephen has just left the house around 12:45 p.m. to pick up his father, 78-year-old John Privacki, so the older man doesn't have to drive. Jed's girlfriend, April Boss, is expected later. It looks like an ordinary family Sunday. In Seth's version, this is the moment he decides it's time. He goes into his parents' bedroom, opens the closet, and takes his father's .22 caliber Ruger handgun. He hides it behind his back and walks downstairs. Jed doesn't even turn around. 1 second, he's watching TV. The next, Seth raises the gun and fires a single shot into the back of his brother's head. Jed never has a chance to get off the couch. Seth drags his brother's body to the basement to get him out of sight. It's clumsy, ugly work. Jed is taller and heavier. Sheets get pulled, cushions knocked over. The house is already beginning to look wrong. But Seth isn't finished. Now he waits. A short time later, he hears the car in the drive. His father is back with his grandfather. They step into the garage side by side, heading toward the door into the house. This should have been the moment the older man gets hugged, his coat taken. Some joke made about the cold. Instead, Seth ambushes them. He steps out and shoots his father in the back of the head. Then, he turns the gun on his grandfather and fires again. According to investigators, he shoots the old man twice to make sure he was dead. 2 generations dropped on a garage floor that still smells like oil and concrete. 3 family members down. 2 to go. He goes back inside and heads upstairs. Linda is in the bathroom, just finishing a shower. No idea that the world outside that door has already been wiped out. Seth waits, gun in hand. When she comes out, he shoots her too, a close-range shot to the head. Downstairs, the phone is probably still sitting on the receiver. Quiet. The TV might still be on. From the driveway, the house looks exactly the way it did that morning. Inside, 4 members of the Privacki family are dead. And there's one more person on the way to walk into this. Sometime after all this, April pulls into the long drive on Russell Road, probably rehearsing what she's going to say to Jed's mom, thinking about leftovers, school the next day, Christmas coming up. She steps into the house she's been in 100 times before. Some accounts say she sees a body almost immediately. Either Stephen or John in the garage, or Jed not where he should be. Whether it takes 1 second or 10, the realization hits something is horribly wrong. Before she can react, Seth raises the gun again and shoots April in the head as she comes into the kitchen area. Just like that, 5 people are dead. The time between Stephen leaving at 12:45 and April's body hitting the floor is estimated at about 35 minutes. Half an hour to erase a family. After the last shot, there's a moment that never appears on crime scene diagrams. The silence afterward, with only an 18-year-old standing in the middle of it. No shouting, no sirens, no one else in the house, just Seth. He has the gun. He has 5 bodies. And he has to decide what happens next. At first, he does nothing. Then he moves into a different mode, damage control. He starts cleaning. He pulls sheets from beds, wraps bodies, tries to drag or position them. Blood is everywhere. Carpets, tile, walls, furniture. This isn't TV. You don't wipe 5 execution-style shots off a house with a couple of paper towels. He manages some of it. Some he just smears around. He also knows he can't do it alone. Around 2 p.m. he calls a friend from school, another 18-year-old. We'll call him Steven. Seth tells him something like, "I need your help. It's bad." He doesn't say exactly how bad, not over the phone. Steven agrees to come. When he arrives around 2:30, he walks into what looks, at first glance, like an empty house. Then he sees what's in the basement. Bodies wrapped in sheets, blood. Seth tells him what he's done. One by one, mother, father, brother, grandfather, girlfriend, each shot in the head. April killed because she saw too much the second she walked in. Imagine being 18 standing there while your friend explains that everyone in the house is dead. Steven doesn't call 911. He doesn't run. He starts helping. The 2 teenagers begin with the gun. It's the easiest piece to get rid of. Steven takes the Ruger and a magazine, gets back in his car, and drives about 10 miles away to a pond off a back road. He throws the gun and magazine into the water. They sink into Michigan mud. He turns around and drives back. On the way, he gets rid of the spent shell casings from the killings, dropping them into a trash can at a gas station like tossing out candy wrappers. He also stops at a grocery store and buys duct tape and cleaning supplies. On his way back to Russell Road, he swings into a Blockbuster Video to return a movie he and Seth had rented earlier. They had due dates to worry about, apparently, even in the middle of a massacre. At some point that afternoon or evening, he goes home for a while and even shows up at a church youth group, sitting through songs and prayers with the knowledge of 5 bodies wrapped in sheets just a few miles away. Back at the Privacki house, Seth spends hours mopping up blood, moving furniture, and trying to turn a massacre into what might look like a robbery gone wrong. Drawers are opened. Items are moved. A TV is disconnected. It's staging, but it's sloppy. The kind of staging you do when you've seen crime shows, not crime scenes. Later that night, Steven comes back. The plan, at least in their heads, is to bury the bodies on the property. But reality catches up fast. 5 adult bodies are much heavier than 2 teenagers thought. They can't move them far, even wrapped in sheets. They drag some. They reposition others. Nothing looks like a burial is going to happen that night. So they revert to Plan B, make it look like strangers did this. They take items from the house, a TV, some valuables, to sell or hide later, to strengthen the robbery narrative. They vandalize parts of the house. Later reports mention damage that didn't need to be done for any other purpose than to make everything look chaotic and random. But chaos has its own timing. Around midnight, headlights sweep up the long drive. It's April's parents. Their daughter was supposed to be home hours ago. When she didn't show, they waited, called, then finally decided to drive over, assuming there had been a miscommunication or car trouble. What they find instead is 2 teenage boys in the wrong place at the wrong time. The sight of the boss's car rolling up the drive spooks Seth and Steven instantly. They drop what they're doing and bolt out the back, slipping into the woods behind the house. April's parents park, walk up to the door, and step inside a house they've been in many times before. This time, nobody comes to greet them. They call out. Silence. Then they see something that makes every cell in their bodies scream. Within minutes, they are back outside, on a cell phone, calling 911, trying to get the words out. Our daughter, the family, there's blood, please. Send someone. It's just after midnight when the first deputies arrive. When Muskegon County Sheriff's officers and state police pull into the drive, their training kicks in. They don't rush straight into the house because, as far as they know, an armed killer could still be inside. They secure the perimeter, get April's parents to safety, and begin setting up a command post. In the woods nearby, Seth and Stephen are hiding, listening. They don't stick together long. Stephen is spotted coming out of the trees by officers using tracking dogs. When police shout, he gives up quickly. He knows he's not getting away on foot. They take him into custody. Down at the sheriff's department, the story starts to spill out. At first, Stephen tries to minimize his role, but confronted with what detectives already see in the house, the bodies, the sheets, the attempt at staging, he cracks. He admits that Seth killed his family in April and that he helped clean up, dump the gun, and make it look like a robbery because he was scared Seth might kill him too. Back at Russell Road, investigators now know the killer isn't in the house. He's out there somewhere. And he knows the woods a lot better than they do. Overnight, a manhunt begins. Police shut down roads. They bring in more K-9 units. A helicopter circles overhead with a searchlight, sweeping the dark tree lines and barns. Reeth's Puffer High School is put on lockdown as a precaution in the morning. No one wants an angry, armed 18-year-old walking into a building full of kids. Seth does what a lot of teenagers on the run do. He tries to blend back into normal life. He hides in the woods for hours, then moves, then hides again. In the early morning, around 7 a.m., he comes out near a road and starts hitchhiking. A classmate driving by recognizes him and, unbelievably, picks him up, giving him a ride and dropping him at another friend's house a short distance away. As soon as she pulls away from the driveway, she does what you hope someone would do. She calls the police. Officers converge on the property she's described. A farm about a mile from the Privacki home. They find a barn. Inside, they find Seth, hiding. This time, he doesn't run. He surrenders without a fight, says almost nothing, and asks for a lawyer. In the span of about 13 hours, he's gone from orchestrating the deaths of 5 people he saw every day to sitting in the back of a patrol car, hands cuffed, clothes stained. The weight of what he's done finally bigger than any lie he can tell. At the sheriff's department, investigators start the long process, documenting the scene, interviewing witnesses, sitting across from an 18-year-old who looks more like a tired student than a mass murderer, and asking the questions that will circle this case for decades. What happened in that house? And why? In part 3, we'll go inside those interviews and into the courtroom. The bizarre story Seth first tried to sell about a murder-suicide pact, the confession that followed, the plea that took a trial off the table, and how a judge in a town tried to make sense of a teenager who turned Thanksgiving weekend into a killing field. The morning after his arrest, 18-year-old Seth Privacki sat in an interview room at the Muskegon County Sheriff's Department. He didn't look like a monster. He looked like a tired high school kid in yesterday's clothes. Detectives who were there later said what struck them most wasn't rage or tears. It was the absence of anything at all, like nobody was home. At first, Seth didn't say much. He asked for a lawyer. He stared at the table. But as hours passed and the weight of what had happened settled over the station, he did what a lot of guilty people do when silence starts to feel too loud. He began to talk. The story he offered was wild enough to almost sound like something from TV. According to Seth, he hadn't wiped out his family. Jed had. In this first version, Seth said the shootings were part of a murder-suicide pact between the brothers that had gone wrong. He claimed Jed had been the one to shoot their parents, their grandfather, and April. Seth said he had only shot Jed at the end, after losing his nerve to follow through with his own suicide. The rest, he suggested, was panic and cleanup. To investigators who had just spent the night walking through that house, it didn't add up. The crime scene told its own story. The positioning of the bodies, the angles of the shots, the way the cleanup had happened. None of it supported the idea that there had been a second gunman moving through the house in parallel, or that Jed had somehow murdered 4 people and then handed his little brother the weapon in a neat, cinematic exchange. Still, detectives did what they always do. They let him talk. They took notes. They compared what he said to what they could see. And then, slowly, they pushed back. What about the security footage of Seth trying to buy .22 ammunition the night before? What about the friend who had already admitted helping him throw the gun into a pond and ditch spent casings in a gas station trash can? What about the fact that every shell recovered in the house matched a single weapon? Seth's story about a murder-suicide pact lasted less than 24 hours. By the next day, he dropped it. In a formal statement, he admitted what everyone in town already suspected. He, and he alone, had shot his parents, his brother, his grandfather, and April. The new narrative came wrapped in self-pity. He talked about feeling unloved, about his father threatening to kick him out of the house, about the car that had been taken away when he brought home a C. He described months of simmering resentment, fights over school, rules he felt were unfair. He did not have a good answer for why that added up, in his mind, to 5 bullets in 5 heads. It just built up, he said. For detectives, it was as close to a motive as they were ever going to get. 2 days after the murders, on December 1st, 1998, Seth Pravacki was formally arraigned in Muskegon County District Court on 5 counts of open murder and 5 counts of felony firearm. Open meant the charges could include first-degree premeditated murder, felony murder, or second degree. It would be up to the evidence and, eventually, a jury. He stood before the judge in an orange jumpsuit, shackled, hair still in the everyday cut of a Midwestern teenager. The courtroom was packed with reporters, neighbors, classmates, and family members of the victims. His bond was set at $5 million. Sitting not far away, his friend, 18-year-old Stephen Wallace, the one who helped move the bodies and dump the gun, was held on the exact same amount, facing the exact same 5 counts of open murder. To the community, it looked like 2 teenagers had destroyed a family. Underneath, the legal paths of the 2 boys were already starting to diverge. As investigators sorted through the crime scene and testimony, a clearer picture of Stephen's role emerged. He had not been in the house when the shootings happened. He had no prior history of violence. Everything he did that day, driving the gun to a pond, tossing shell casings, coming back to help stage the scene, happened after Seth told him the killings had already taken place. That didn't make him innocent, but it did make him something different from the person who had actually pulled the trigger. Over the next few months, prosecutors quietly began repositioning him, from suspected co-killer to accessory after the fact. Seth, on the other hand, was locked in. 5 victims, 5 shots, a confession, and a community that would never forgive him. While lawyers argued over motions and reporters tried to wring meaning from every scrap of information, the people who knew the victims were walking through a different kind of winter. Stephen and Linda's friends at church and work, John's elderly companions, Jed's teammates and classmates, April's parents and siblings, all of them were trying to fold this impossible reality into their days. In the weeks after the murders, Reeth's Puffer High School kept grief counselors on hand. Students who had sat next to Seth in class talked about how they'd never seen this coming. Others said, quietly, that he'd always seemed a little off, a little detached. Teachers looked back over report cards and discipline notes, trying to see if there had been some red flag they missed. On TV, the story played as a kind of American nightmare. Good family, solid house, no obvious chaos. And then an 18-year-old wipes them out over a holiday weekend. Talk shows debated super predators and kids these days. Newspapers asked if this was about violent media, drugs, mental illness, or just one young man's bottomless selfishness. Behind the scenes, Seth's defense attorney was doing math of his own. Muskegon County's prosecutor had a confession, a motive, a timeline, and physical evidence. Michigan allowed life without parole for first-degree murder. There was no death penalty to bargain with, but there was a question any defense lawyer has to consider in a case like this. Is there any point in going to trial? In early 1999, just a few months after the shootings, the answer came into focus. To avoid putting everyone through a full trial and to slice off the tiny chance of acquittal or a lesser verdict, Seth agreed to enter a plea. No contest to 5 counts of first-degree murder and 5 counts of felony firearm. No contest meant he wasn't technically saying I did it, but he was accepting that the state had enough evidence to convict him as if he had. The effect was the same as a guilty plea. He would stand convicted of killing his parents, his brother, his grandfather, and his brother's girlfriend. In May 1999, the case moved to sentencing. The judge's task was straightforward and brutal. Under Michigan law, first-degree murder carried a mandatory sentence of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The only question was how he would express it, and whether he would say anything to a teenager who had destroyed so many lives before he'd had a chance to start his own. The courtroom was crowded again. Reporters filled the back rows. Family members, some in tears, some stiff with anger, sat up front. Seth read a statement. He talked about being sorry. He talked about being scared, about his life spiraling, about feeling trapped. At one point, he asked the judge for something that left almost everyone in the room stunned. He said that before he was sent to prison for the rest of his life, he wanted to be allowed to see the world. The request landed like a slap. A young man who had shot 5 people in the head, who had dragged his brother's body to the basement and wrapped his grandfather in a sheet, who had tried to scrub blood out of carpets and stage a fake robbery, was asking for a field trip. The judge's answer was short. No. He pronounced the sentence, life in prison without the possibility of parole on each of the 5 murder counts, plus mandatory 2-year terms for each felony firearm charge. The sentences would run concurrently. In practical terms, Seth would never walk free again. For the first time in public, the teenager many officers had described as flat and emotionless broke. He cried. Not when the photos were shown, not when the 911 calls were played, not when April's family talked about the empty chair at their table. When he finished reading his own statement, talking about his own life, he cried. It was not the kind of moment that wins sympathy. The prosecutor called the crime scene one of the most brutal he had ever seen. Even some of the deputies who'd worked homicides for years said that house on Russell Road was the one that stayed with them. The Thanksgiving decorations still up, the leftovers in the fridge, the plates that would never be used. Outside the courthouse, April's family told reporters that no sentence could balance what they'd lost. One of her brothers, who would later join the Marine Corps and talk publicly about how his sister's murder had shaped him, said it felt like a piece of their house had been ripped away forever. Inside, Seth was led out of the courtroom in shackles. He was 18 years old. He would spend the next 11 years behind bars. While Seth began his life sentence, his friend's fate played out more slowly. Prosecutors reduced the charges against Stephen Wallace from open murder to 5 counts of accessory after the fact and 5 counts of felony firearm. They argued that he had helped dispose of the weapon, tamper with the scene, and delay discovery of the bodies. In November 1999, almost a year after the killings, Stephen's case went to trial. His defense was simple. He had acted out of fear. He was 18. He walked into a house full of bodies. His best friend had a gun and had just admitted to killing his entire family. When Seth told him to help, he believed that saying no might make him victim number 6. Jury members listened to hours of testimony about those hours on Russell Road, the pond, the Blockbuster tape, the duct tape, the church youth group, and then returned a verdict that infuriated some in law enforcement and relieved others who knew the boy. Not guilty on all counts. Acquitted. A senior detective later called it a travesty, arguing that whatever his motives, Wallace had helped cover up a massacre. Others, including some locals, thought the jury had done the only humane thing for a teenager who had stumbled into someone else's nightmare. Stephen didn't walk away clean. Within weeks, prosecutors charged him with misdemeanor property destruction for vandalism at the house during his return visits that Sunday. He eventually pleaded no contest, was ordered to pay restitution, and in later years, racked up his own separate record: domestic violence, resisting police, probation violations. But in the story of the Privacki murders, the law drew a hard line. One teenager was a killer. The other helped afterward and walked free. In Part 4, we'll follow what happened next: Seth's years in prison and the strange jailhouse letter where he tried to explain why, the 2010 escape attempt that ended the same way his victims' lives did, and how Muskegon still talks about a Thanksgiving weekend that never really ended.